It's therefore left to me to introduce Christine, our first keynote speaker, a quite brilliant entrepreneur, and she's here to tell us about her success and the building of Gwynnie Bee. Thanks very much.
I brought my phone up in case I needed a timer to keep us back on track, but I see there's a giant one staring at me. Okay, so when Matt asked me to speak, he asked me to come in and talk a little bit about myself and a little bit about the business that I'm running now. So I'm going to spend basically about half the time on me and half the time on the business. The two main themes that you're going to hear, I guess I'll put this down here, that you're going to hear from me are about fixation and disruption. And they both influence me as a person and then also me as an entrepreneur and how I get involved in things. So a little bit about my background. I was born in a small farming town in Pennsylvania in the US. Very poor area. My high school was in the bottom 5% of all high schools, all public schools in the country. And the way I defined myself as a kid growing up was really as an athlete. I got very fixated very early on all things sports. So I played soccer at a state level. I played basketball at a state level, and I played field hockey at a national level. I ended up getting into Princeton University in 1995 to play field hockey. I jokingly refer to that as my primary major at school, which was field hockey. But actually I started off as a molecular biology major for 2 years, took an English class, an English literature class, and became a little bit enamored and fixated on this incredibly witty, funny professor. And in order to get him to be my thesis advisor, I switched my major over to a very practical English literature and medieval studies. So with this great degree in English literature and medieval studies, I moved my way into strategic finance and then ultimately data and technology. So my first job out of college was in strategic finance. It was the boom. Everybody was going public. The technology consulting company that I joined was no different than the science and Viance that had already made it out on the public markets. The big difference was we missed the window. So I worked directly for the CFO in what was originally budgeting and planning across 13 offices and 21 corporate departments. And I was 22 years old, coming with an English background, so there was a lot for me to learn. And the first 6 months, I was completely underwater, but knew I'd figure out how this whole finance area worked over time. Then the crash happened, and I spent the next year restructuring the company. I ran 7 restructurings, laid off 800 out of 1,100 people. I was probably the most loathed employee in the company. As I walked around with all the technology consultants and measured their utilization and their productivity and how critical they were to projects, so that as we kept cutting during 2000, they knew they were kind of next on the chopping block. After that, I briefly went to toy design school. So I've started my master's in 2003 to build children's toys. And again, this sort of came out of being burned out of the strategic finance area, knowing that wasn't quite my passion, not sure exactly what was. And so I decided on a whim to apply to toy design school. Got into one of the top programs in the country, but very quickly realized this was also not my passion in life. So I took a job with Right Media. I was employee number 8, and I came in as a project manager. I was still going to school full-time and sort of working part-time. And I fell in love with the company. And this is where I really started to get, to feel like I was getting my footing in what I really loved and what my then passion became in life, which was around disruption. So Right Media, as a company, it was very pioneering in its day, invented the first online ad exchange. So it was a very inefficient market between buyers and sellers and trading online ad impressions to advertisers. And we came in with a model that fundamentally would change the way supply and demand interacted with each other. brought a ton of efficiency to the market. The only question was really, could we get all of these established businesses to actually take the leap and try what was a very disruptive and risky model. Over the next 3 years, the company grew 10x and then 10x again, and was basically has shaped the entire online advertising industry, and it's now kind of the de facto way ads are bought and sold on the web. Yahoo acquired that business in 2007, as Matt said, for $850 million. At the company, I started off as a project manager and ended up becoming the chief operating officer and the president. I managed everything from sales, marketing, product management, client services, actual engineering and technical operations. So oddly enough, everything but finance, which is sort of where I started and what I knew best. However, when Yahoo acquired us, I wasn't sure where that kind of left me. I'm not exactly a big company person. Things don't move quickly enough, and it's harder to take very disruptive risks. So I stayed on at Yahoo and for a year for what they call golden handcuffs, while waiting for my stock to vest, and co-ran a project to reinvent Yahoo's online advertising marketplace. So it was very interesting, it was very disruptive within Yahoo. It created a way to bid across guaranteed and non-guaranteed inventory, but ultimately was still being done within the belly of Yahoo. So I left and I took some time off trying to figure out what to do next. Ultimately, went to another small company in the data and technology space trying to create a bandwidth exchange. So again, very disruptive model, pulling together all the bandwidth providers in order to move files around the internet in really efficient ways. That company, I was the chief operating officer of that company as well, and then we sold that to Facebook in 2010. And at that point I knew I didn't want to go to a big company, so I didn't even bother moving on to Facebook. But at that time, thought about, okay, well, what do I want to do next, right? I clearly get very into things. I knew I had found my passion in life, which is using data and technology to bring disruptive models into industries, relatively industry agnostic, but know that that's really what drives me. And so I was now at the point in my career where I was thinking, had 2 acquisitions, which is great, but what's the next big challenge? And so my co-founder and I talked for about a year around what to do and why to do it and what were our main goals and in what industry. So we actually ended up looking at energy, healthcare, travel, a little bit in the food space, and apparel. And realized that what we wanted to do, really what was anchoring everything, was 1, use data and technology to disrupt an industry. 2, do something that actually impacts the end lives of consumers in a positive way. So it's hard to argue online advertising did that. It's also hard to argue a bandwidth exchange would have done that. But this time, really start thinking about what can we do to positively impact the end lives of consumers. And then the third goal was to build a long-lasting institution. So while it's great to be acquired, you also build a business very differently when you're looking for an acquisition versus when you think you can actually create a long-lasting institution, something with great economic properties and something that can kind of stand on its own as a public company. So those were the 3 goals in starting Gwynnie Bee. So this is how we ended up at Gwynnie Bee. Checking my notes. So I'm going to talk about Gwynnie Bee. So we believe that we are doing something truly transformational in the apparel industry. As you guys in the room know, apparel is a $1.5 trillion industry. It's huge, but it hasn't really been disrupted through the use of data and technology. It's actually one of the product categories that doesn't work very well online. So we saw a huge opportunity to come in with something innovative and different and try to shake that industry up. So I'm not going to tell you everything about the business today, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the consumer side and what we're doing with the first service that we run, which is called Gwynnie Bee. So Gwynnie Bee is a rental-based subscription service, a very long phrase that probably feels like a lot of buzzwords, but it is a service for women sizes 10 through 32, so the plus size woman, in the United States today. It runs just like Netflix. So we've basically implemented a model. Netflix we think of as entertainment as a service, their software as a service. We've implemented a model that we call clothing as a service, which is why Matt mentioned the Netflix of fashion. So the way that you can think about it is exactly like Netflix used to run. You sign up for a plan, you build your queue, you get a certain number of DVDs mailed to you. As soon as you're done with them, you put it in the mail, send it back, and the next one comes. That's exactly how Gwynnie Bee works, which for apparel is actually quite novel. You sign up for a plan, you build an online closet or queue out of the content catalog, and from that, we will ship you 3 items. You wear them as long or as little as you want, and as soon as you ship 1, 2, or 3 of them back, we send you the next thing from your closet. So it's basically a way to have an unlimited wardrobe on a limited budget. You're paying one flat fee, all the shipping's covered, all the labor's covered, the clothing is obviously covered, as is the cleaning. So that's our model, that's how Gwynnie Bee works. There are some tremendous benefits to consumers from this model. And you can think of them fitting in really 2 different buckets. One being emotional. There's a bucket of emotional benefits and there's a bucket of economical benefits. On the economic side, what you have is the ability to experience many more pieces of clothing than you ever would have thought to put money down for and buy. And obviously today, most people only wear clothing that they own. That's hugely limiting from a consumer perspective because it drives you, and I'm looking at the audience, it drives you into mainly a basics-driven wardrobe. Things that you can get repeated use out of, and things that make a lot of economic sense to own permanently. That's limiting, right? It doesn't allow you to take a bunch of risk. It doesn't allow you to experiment with new styles. A clothing as a service model, a business like Gwynnie Bee really allows you to try out and wear many different things than you would ever think about buying, and all for a fraction of the cost. So our average consumer wears about $1,200 worth of clothing from us a month, and it costs her about $100. So it's a great sort of no-brainer economic value for the consumer. Almost more importantly, however, is the emotional benefit to the consumer, in particular because we're serving women sizes 10 through 32. So very similar demo to the UK, but it's 67% of the adult female population in the US wears size 14 and above. And when you start at size 10, you actually capture 75% of the adult female population. And yet that group is spending about 17% of the dollars. So when we were thinking about, well, which demo do we take this model to and where do we start? This became a natural opportunity given that it's the majority of the population and the minority of the spend. It's hugely underserved. This is a woman with money and this is a woman who shops online. So she's 3 times more likely to shop online than her straight size counterpart. So you obviously, because you're serving an underserved demographic, there's a little bit of emotional benefit there. But most importantly, the model itself is a compliment generator. So you can imagine every day you're coming into work, you're wearing something different, something new. It's a little bit brighter, it's a little bit louder, it's a little bit more interesting. You get compliments. And that is a really big factor that drives loyalty and stickiness of a consumer. It's obviously how we make her feel. And this service makes her feel good about herself. And that was probably the most surprising thing. Obviously, when we started, we wanted to positively benefit the end lives of consumers. But the impact that this was actually having on her life and things that we were hearing from the consumer, from the feedback docs that we would get from the posts on Facebook, that was actually really surprising to us how important this was for her. And because of that stickiness and because of the economic benefits, we are able to drive a really nice, rapidly growing business operating this clothing as a service model. This also not only has great economic benefit for the consumer, it's also just a great business model. It's a super high margin business with some powerful underlying unit economics. Largely driven by the fact that essentially what we're doing is raising the utilization of the core asset in the economy. So you can think of what Airbnb does for homes, a little bit of what Uber does for cars. You take a dormant or an underutilized asset and you start monetizing it in little slices from people. That creates value for all, and it creates great value for the consumer, but it also creates great value for us as a business. The other thing that this model does, if you take a step back and think about it, as traditional retail is a one-off transaction, right? It's a point of sale interaction that you have with your consumer for most kinds of companies on a relatively infrequent basis, which means there's little incentive for the consumer to give you data, to give you feedback, especially in a detailed, ongoing way. Our model is a relationship. The consumer is in a relationship with Gwynnie Bee. She's there month to month. She's renting tons of items from us each month. We are a core part of the way that she manages and accesses her wardrobe. Because of that, the model itself kicks off a ton of data, probably an unprecedented amount from an apparel perspective. We use that data to kind of drive the whole business, but do four main things with it. So first, we use it to enhance the customer experience. So most of what we've done to make clothing work online is really around fit, discovery, and personalization. So part of the reason that apparel doesn't work well online is it's not a search metaphor. You can't type in keywords and find exactly what you're looking for. You type in red dress, you'll get all sorts of junk. It's a browse metaphor. You need to see the catalog and flip through images. The challenge when you have a very large collection is that it's tedious to do that. So the way that we make that process more convenient for our consumer is by using all the data we have to make recommendations and to aid her through the discovery process, to only surface up the pieces of the collection that are actually relevant for her. We also, since we have so many feedback and data points, use it to drive our fit algorithms. So in plus size apparel, about 25% of what you order online fits you. 75% doesn't and ends up being returned. Our fit algorithm has accuracy to close to 80%. Now I'd like to say it's because we have genius technologists, but it's really because of the amount of data the model generates. That's what allows our algorithms to get smarter and smarter over time relatively rapidly. So that's one thing we use the data for, right? Our fit, recommendations, and discovery. The second thing is for operational efficiency. So we definitely copy what Amazon is best in the world at, which is use all of this data to drive as much operational efficiency out of our business and our logistics as possible. That way we can plow all of those earnings back into the consumer experience. We share insights with brands. So that's the third thing we do with the data. Because we're in this relationship with the consumer and we're collecting so much information, it's really valuable for our brands to have access to that information. It can tell them a lot about, well, if they had just changed the armhole, or if they had moved a tie in a certain place, or they'd gone with a slightly softer fabric, the consumer would have reacted to it a lot better. And this is the kind of data that we generate that's really useful for our brands. And we buy from about 150 brands. So in the plus size world, that's actually an incredible breadth of selection. And then lastly, the fourth thing we use the data for is to drive our own private label. So we manufacture maybe 20% of our garments under a number of different brand names. We don't do it because we want to be in the design aspect of the industry. We do it because there aren't enough brands out there servicing plus size. So we have to do it to fill a gap. So those are kind of the four things that we do with data, which are all generated by this relationship model, which is really what allows the disruption, right? We can make clothing work online through fit and discovery. We can drive better operational efficiency for us, and we can make our suppliers a lot healthier and help them manufacture better clothing that'll suit the consumer better, all driven by this clothing as a service model. So I see that I have a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to wrap up. And just say, being new to the apparel industry, being new to the retail industry, I'm actually really excited about all of the changes Matt was talking about. It's a great time to be a disruptive data and technology company in the apparel space. And we're really excited about what we're doing. And I've just talked about the demand side or the consumer side today. We've got a lot of really interesting things going on in the supply side as well that we're actually even more excited about. but given time limitations, decided to focus just on the consumer side. So I have 5 minutes left, which I wanted to open up to questions, just for a little bit of a change of pace. So if anybody has any questions over the last 5 minutes, I'll take those. If not, we'll all get 5 minutes back. Yes. I heard the word occasion, and then she's handing you a mic.
What percentage of occasion do you think you fulfill for your customers?
So we, in general, it's very natural when you think of rental to think about one-time occasion based, right? You're going to a wedding, you're going to a fancy ball. We actually stay away from occasion wear for various inventory management reasons. It's actually not a great business. From a use case, an end use perspective, our user, the Gwynnie Bee consumer, uses us about 70% for work, for her everyday workwear. So she works in a business casual or business professional environment, and about 20% for her weekend wear, and about 10% for her going out wear. It's probably around that distribution, given that she's a bit older from a demographic standpoint, so there isn't as much weighted towards the going out and weekend.
I've got a question. Will you open up physical retail stores, so showrooms?
So we just opened one on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan, which was exciting because it's the first plus-size store on Fifth, and it really is just a showroom. So it's a pop-up. We're only running it for 2 to 3 months, and it was about, for us, learning what the physical retail space was like. I think we see a lot of benefit in brick and mortar, but it's about how you bring those two experiences together. So we launched the showroom from an acquisition perspective, right? So how can we acquaint people with the brand? How can we get them in touching and feeling the clothing so that they know the quality of clothing that we carry? And they can get very familiar with their fit, so that first box works out a little better. And then also as a member retention incentive. So New York is our largest city from a customer standpoint. And we have a ton of members who kind of come in and they want to check out the new arrivals and they want to chat and hang out. And I think that's because it is a relationship-based model. It does have that membership feel to it. And it's going really well. I mean, we're learning a ton. It's unclear at this point whether that's a strategy and a direction we go after hard in the next 6 months, or we continue to test in various parts of the country to figure out exactly what the main driver and main objective would be with expanding in the pop-up space.
Thanks for that. I really love the model. I was just wondering how you cope with the wear and tear of clothes, because that's the hardest piece in my mind to solve.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. So a couple things. We run a massive cleaning plant. So we do dry cleaning and wet cleaning, which is different than laundry. And before starting this business, who would have known that? There's actually a third type of cleaning. We've engineered a bunch of the solvents to extend durability, right? Durability is a huge piece of what drives the economics of the business. That said, the consumer needs those clothes to come looking and feeling brand new. So any sign of wear and tear, we have to pull it from the collection. That has driven us to do a few things. One, work with suppliers who think about that in their construction. So how can we bring in really good, soft ITY, polysynthetic fabrics that will last a really long time, have good fabric memory, and have really long-lasting color, and has pushed us away from a lot of the significantly cheaper cotton, because it doesn't have the same core characteristics of a synthetic garment. And where we do look to bring in natural fibers, we do it in ways where we know the construction will make it through the cycle enough times. So we've actually invested quite a lot in durability and garment care. We've custom programmed the machines that clean in order to take into account specific fibers, specific colors, the drum speed that goes through in the cleaning machines, on making sure that we're treating each individual fiber like a little Fabergé egg, because it's really important. But it's been a fascinating piece of the business.
So typically, how many times is each garment lit?
Yep. So he asks typically how many times does each garment go out. So the average life of a garment for us is about 18 months. So we're able to get 18 months of usage. There's no due dates on the clothing, so it's hard to know how many exact wears there are. Some people may keep it and wear it 5 times. Some people may keep it and wear it once and send it back. But the average age is about 18 months.
The plus size space, obviously, everybody knows is a kind of really underserved market, but there seems this disconnect between, as you say, not enough brands and yet lots of consumers not being served. So I'm interested to know what you think about that and whether you think it's to do with an education piece for the customer kind of knowing that they can wear things that perhaps they weren't served, and sort of how that fits into your business in terms of customer acquisition costs.
I mean, I think, look, everybody in apparel knows, and this will be my last question since it's flashing at me, that I'm negative 24 seconds. Everybody knows plus is a huge opportunity, right? Apparel retailers have been looking to get in that space for, a long time, and they're not really yet. So there's obviously, it's not like people are missing a giant opportunity. There's obviously something kind of systemic that is difficult about the space. I think in the US alone, I don't know much about the UK dynamics, but in the US, it really started in the 80s where the consumer just started getting bigger and bigger, right? And that didn't take off until the mid 80s. And for the first maybe 10, 12 years of that, it was a commonly accepted thing that once she lost weight, then she could go shopping. And in the meantime, she can just go buy a muumuu from Lane Bryant, right? And that's where everybody was pushed, and that's how the consumer was thought of. However, in the early 2000s, you've got this generation that has now grown up with a lot of larger people around all the time. It's 2/3 of the population. And this generation that is not willing to accept you get to tell me when I am good enough to go buy clothing. That really didn't start happening until the early to mid 2000s. And it's taken apparel quite a long time to respond. One, because the Gap tried it, right? The Gap came out with a plus size line that went bankrupt or they shut down within 9 months after launching because they got the fit all wrong. Limited or Express came out with a plus size line that they shut down in a year because they got the fit all wrong. So there are some technical challenges to it. You also, because you are retraining the consumer, as you say, a woman who has not been taught to go look for interesting things, it takes her a little bit of time to gain trust with the brand and to gain trust that there are more interesting things out there. But that's happening, right? There's kind of this groundswell that we're able to, frankly, ride the wave of as that consumer is yelling more and more loudly with more and more dollars, but it's largely driven by those 28 to 35-year-olds. Okay, all right, that's it, thanks.